So you want to be a diversity trainer, right? So it is not really just for people who want to be or hire trainers. The focus of this particular section is really for those folks who want to be effective in interacting with diversity topics, right? So how do you interact effectively with diversity topics? Um, of race and racism, because there are some things that I'd like to kind of get straight about race and racism. Um, Also, how to develop cultural agility. So we're moving a little bit away from cultural competence to cultural agility. So we'll talk about that. I want to spend a little bit of time on gender pronouns and the importance of gender pronouns. Facilitate a group on issues of diversity. So how do you even have diversity talk, right? So how do you talk to people about diversity? And then what activities should I do or not do with when working with groups or organizations? So we'll go through the rest of those questions as we kind of go forward, right? So how to talk about race and racism in ways that invite dialogue. So the first thing you need to do is identify this idea of universality and uniqueness. So recognizing that we are all very similar, but we're also very different because we've come from different contexts. Those contexts can be our nation, they could be our time frame, they could be our family, our geography, our country. So all of those things that make us who we are very different. However, we also have some universal attributes and traits that we have to recognize, right? So sometimes when I'm in session, I'll ask people, please raise your hand if you've ever hungered for something. And so people will raise their hand. Or I'll ask someone, if you've ever been in love, raise your hand. And so people will raise their hand because they've been in love. And I'll ask, if you've ever had your heart broken, raise your hand, and people will raise their hand. And then I'll say, if you've ever been the heartbreaker, raise both your hands, and then people laugh, right? So we can all share those things because those are very common human experiences, right? So that's the universality piece. The uniqueness aspect comes in when we talk about what have you yearned for. So for some people it was pizza. For other people they yearned for right? Or they yearn for success, and so that's important to know what we've yearned for. Those people who've been in love, not everybody's been in love in the same way. Not everyone's heart being broken has happened in the same way, and so realize and recognize that that uniqueness and universality. So when we start talking about this idea of race, then we can come to a place where we can have comfortable or even uncomfortable conversations, but conversations that don't get people that allow people to express themselves in positive ways, right? So that becomes important. One of the things we also must recognize is that often people will say that race is a social construct. I don't know if you've heard that before, but people will say that race is a social construct. And I would say that is a way of looking at it. I don't think it's the most comprehensive, most effective way at race, because I didn't fill out any social stuff. No, like ask me what what I want it to be or how. I never was asked that stuff. So and when we say that it's a social construct, that's the passive voice. And the passive voice can be problematic because it does not indicate who the actor is, right? So the passive voice. So here's an example. So my mother told us not to play ball. We broke a plate home, and she says, "What? Who broke my plate?" And I'm the oldest, the most responsible. Anyway, I just go, mistake. were made. How do you think that went over with my mom? No, it didn't go over very well at all because she wanted to know who the plate, right? And so when we think about this idea of race and we say it's a social construct, there is no actor. It's passive. Once the actor is a better sense of how to approach racism. And so to recognize to right a biological globe, which it is not. Race still has different categories than the United States. The United States than Canada. And so here, there's not a definition that we can come to, right? So race is an organizing tool in countries and states. In various and so that's important to recognize. So I've committed to so however it is our responsibility. And so my grandfather who great grandfather, they had me sweeping the and why are you getting annoyed Saturday morning? Wanted me to sweep said to me was really profound. And even though nobody else does, because it's our alley, right? And so when we think about, racism, but this, and so in our leave it. Here's a video on. We won't need to watch it on your own, but tell me what you think about some things that pop up in that particular video. Develop. We have to recognize culture, and that we can't know everything, and it's not our fault that we can't know everything. We can't know. Is what you right? Everything. So balancing, knowing when to not to use nouns. People important because we talk about gender pronouns and we talk about kind of moving into creating more equitable spaces. The simplest thing or the easiest call people with it. But if you need, you should call. Just remember a time when we were referred to people Mrs. So and still have upbringing, and so when I meet with a Mr. or Mrs. or whatever, right? That recognize our for the master. So you wouldn't dare do that. Just socially, that's where we are today. And so our language context. So why gender pronoun? That old way of and the same that we about people in the Bible may not necessarily. It's also when we have people names from other times, if we're not open to their gender, their type, their gender pronouns, just by looking at someone's name, you may know on the spectrum, right? So where cultures sometimes don't Western American ways of thinking. Lastly, the right? So have them do unto you the platinum rule, which is do unto have you do unto as they'd have them do unto them. Think of the pronoun thing. Call people dignity and honor, and not because they earned it, because they give things. There's a couple of videos pronouns let you on your own, and then how do groups on this again commonalities and differences. We talk about those. Recognize commonalities and talk people can understand. So sometimes when let's talk about, and that is a concept talked about, but you can actually where people know they can find around the situation. And then inviting get conversation. You talk way less than the people information. Let them, and then the process and your opinion. Facilitator, as much as your, so that the group can to chime in when they have to offer, right? So that's very helpful. So what activities should I do? Organizations, the ones activities, right? Together in an activity. Do one and ones that don't. So if to point out people's even more those to shy away about that one. We'll talk more about restorative. So has gone and they need to check a training box to make sure that they're compliant with statute. But then there's also things that help hurts. That's where restorative justice, you heal the hurt rather than problem. Those are kind of two ways to think about that. And you can fix a problem when you have necessary requires that be fixed. That take the time to do. One way to do that is build around the circle. Well, think about. Lastly, how do I demonstrate return on investment in terms of diversity, working topics and diversity talk, and is and whatever I count the number of people versus the who couldn't be invited, show up, you follow up with so people, stories, return on diversity. Then you share, people share their stories, clear alignment. Activities that I'm engaging in are organizational values, with mission and purpose of an organization, and keep those are forefront and can draw. And then last things, create reports, demonstrations, power PDF, online videos, show your to the success with the program. And then stuff later. Diversity. What are your goals? And now that you have tools to implement them, your diversity. Why? How do you around race and given what we've talked about? So this section, you in the next class.